To all of that in a moment, but first, Chief Justice Mogoeng Mogoeng says citizens should be able to elect members of parliament directly to ensure corrupt officials don't make it into significant leadership positions. The Chief Justice received a list of MPs and MPLs headed to parliament and provincial legislatures. This happened yesterday. He's overseeing the process that takes place in a crossover from the old administration and the incoming one. To explore his thoughts on this, we are joined by the Chief Justice himself. Chief Justice, a very good afternoon to you. Thank you for coming in. This comment that you made yesterday about how direct leadership, elections by citizens, would possibly help reduce issues around a lack of accountability and corruption and that sort of thing. How would it work in practical terms?
Well, in case South Africans decide to resort to that as an additional avenue for electing public representatives, then they've got to look at other countries where this has been practiced. There are far too many countries to learn from, and I think if that's the direction we incline to go, then we look in that direction. But then Zimbabwe, for instance, whether it's been done well or not, is doing it. Nigeria is doing it. Several African countries are already doing it.
We operate on a party system, proportional representation as far as parliament and the legislatures are concerned. In as far as changing or overhauling the system, how would that work?
Well, the point is the law exists for South Africans. South Africans don't exist for the laws. We made the Constitution. It's for us. It's open to us to change it to ensure that it serves our best interest better. So if we're so inclined, nothing forbids us from migrating to a somewhat different electoral system.
But the tricky bit with your suggestion is that even in countries where people are able to elect individuals, that doesn't completely eliminate ills such as corruption, patronage, and that sort of thing, which we see with the party representation system as well. So why bother with the hassle?
Well, you need a comprehensive strategy to deal with corruption. First, are those charged with the responsibility to ensure that there won't be any corruption incorruptible themselves? Because if the leader is corrupt, he or she will lack the willingness, the willpower, and the capacity to discipline those who are corrupt. So you've got to clean up the act at every level. Who do we appoint to positions of leadership, whether as public servants, judges, or members of the executive or parliament? Then when the system is filled with people who are ethical and are committed to doing things right, then the system will work. It matters who runs the system, who drives the system.
Just on that point then, one of the things you said this week as you've been speaking to the various media houses is that you have the sense that certain lessons have not been learned by our politicians, our political leaders, from judgments as historic as the Nkandla one in 2016. So is electoral reform then what do you think will give them the ultimate wake-up?
I think it's part of what we need to look at. We shouldn't just confine our solution to one direction. Everything that can help to root out our country of corruption must be resorted to. One of the things that I alluded to is strengthening our institutions. Everything possible must be done to eliminate or at least reduce the possibility of those in power interfering with institutions to make sure that they are effective only against others but never against them. We should never be selective in our fight against corruption. We should sweep across the board. Nobody should be rendered untouchable, especially if they are corrupt.
But that's not a new sentiment, Chief Justice. Everyone says we should hold all to account for corruption and pillaging of the country's resources. Yet every year, every month you open a newspaper, there's a story about yet another official linked to graft at some level. So why are we simply not getting it right?
Well, why are we not having corruption on a massive scale within the judiciary? We too are South Africans. I won't say that members of the judiciary are incapable of being corrupt, but everything possible has been done to root the system of corrupt elements. So that must say to you and I, it matters who is in charge of a particular institution or even a private company for corruption to become commonplace or to be rooted out.
So leadership is what you've done right as the
leadership and competent people. You also need capacity. Don't just put people in positions of responsibility because you like them. Put people in position of responsibility because you know as a leader that you are there serving the public, and it is the mandate of the public that you are executing when you appoint people. So appoint only those who will serve the public and serve them well.
But the reality, Chief Justice, is that charisma goes a long way in politics. A lot of political battles are won on personality. So in beginning then to try and get the millions of South Africans to look beyond emotional attachment and charisma, it won't be an overnight process, will it?
It can never be. Massive problems require time to root out, but more importantly, at least have a credible strategy, a credible plan in place, and then move a step further by getting people with the capacity to implement in place so that they can carry out the plan.
I want to speak about the scandals of the past, the better part of the last decade, a lot of them having come before the courts. When you look at the judgments we've had from Gandla to the SASA debacle, is it your sense that our political leaders err legally because they do so unwittingly, or B, do they deliberately go against the law for personal benefit?
I wouldn't like to be direct with that in my answer. All I have to say is what has happened for the past 25 years demands of us to sit back, reflect, identify where we have erred, look for solutions, and go forward assured that people with the competence and the willpower to do the right thing are in place. I think at times part of the problem is this. Public servants must be given the space to correct us. Public servants must never be an integral part of the leader. They are there to support, and when the leader goes wrong, they must be able to say, but that is not right. Let me just allude to something. I hope I won't regret having done this. Recently, there was a clip. One senior public office bearer sought to insist that officials in his or her department do what was wrong. And the officials kept on saying, but no, the prescripts do not allow us to do that. The law does not allow us to do that. Ma'am or sir, we will only do what is right. That is the attitude. Every public servant should, no matter the consequences, adopt that attitude. That is the way to go forward.
And you are referring here, I'll speak directly on it, to the instance involving the Gauteng sports MEC, Faye Mazbuko, who we saw a leaked audio recording of her insisting that staff deliver on combi calls, which she said her party wanted to use for the election. But you hear them in the recording, very senior officials in the department, knowing it's wrong, speaking out, but doing so quite sheepishly. So how do the people, the ordinary people in our government departments, begin to do the standing up to political principles when their own career fortunes are so personally tied to the survival and existence of the very political principles?
The same way members of the judiciary do it. How is it that members of the judiciary are able to handle cases involving known criminals who were convicted before, who have killed and can therefore kill, people who lose huge tenders and may just out of desperation do the unthinkable? Why is it that members of the judiciary, magistrates and judges alike, stick their necks out and say, I'm going to make sure, no matter the consequences, that the right thing is done? You adopt the same principle knowing that even your life or the life of your family members might be at stake, and choose never to forget the plight of the suffering masses, never to forget the commitment in the Constitution that we make on behalf of all South Africans.
With that instance and the various others that have come before the courts where either the Constitutional Court or a High Court has had to direct essentially a government department or Parliament to right a wrong by law, is it your assessment today as Chief Justice of South Africa that South Africa's politicians are constitutionally literate?
I wouldn't put it that high. I would say, one, there is a need to teach all South Africans, including our politicians, more and more about their constitutional obligations. But more importantly, when you are left to be comfortable in doing whatever you do by almost everybody, you tend to get a sense that you can get away with whatever you do. So more vigilance is called for, not only from institutions established to strengthen our constitutional democracy, but from the South African public as well as the media.
Should constitutionalism not form a great part then of who we deploy to places as important as Parliament, where the future of the country is basically decided and determined?
Well, constitutionalism is always critical, but my sense is that even if you don't know much about the Constitution, but you're determined to learn, you're willing to learn, but more importantly, you are a person of integrity, you uphold values and principles that are critical to good governance, then it's just a matter of time before you know what to do and do it well.
I want to take you back to another debate that we have often in the country, and this is the debate about an unfair, if you will, or uneven focus in speaking about instances of corruption in either the public and the private sector. Should we even be making such a comparison, by your reading?
No, we shouldn't. My sense is that we don't pay as much attention to corruption in the private sector as we should.
Why do you think that is?
I wouldn't want to speculate. I would just want to throw a challenge at every South African, including the media, the academia, everybody else. There is always the corruptee and the corruptor. And quite often there's a player in the private sector and in the public sector. What we need to do is to target corruption wherever it is to be found. But if we focus on certain individuals and deal with them because of the corrupt activities they are involved in, but leave others, either because we like them or because we relate to them, we will never root our country of corruption.
Let's speak about the judiciary then. A number of cases we've referenced, you and I, in the past 13 minutes have come before the courts. I'm thinking here of the social grants debacle, where the court, I think, said something to the effect that Minister Bathabile Dlamini was reckless and grossly negligent. Yet here we are, she's still around. We're hearing murmurs that she may be included in the next cabinet. The ordinary South African watching all of this happen, who may have celebrated that pronouncement by the court, may ask, what is the point of it all if there appears to be no real accountability and people live to see another day in political privilege?
Well, the bottom line is we operate in a constitutional democracy, and in a constitutional democracy such as ours, there is separation of powers. The judiciary does not shoulder all the governance responsibilities that lies on the shoulders of the state. There is a role to be played by the executive, there is a role to be played by parliament, but there is also a role to be played by political parties, their members, and the general public. So unfortunately, I'm not able to deal with that except to say the vigilance that I have been calling out for. Pay more interest in the affairs of your country, and speaking out regardless of consequences is important. We should never allow ourselves to recline back in a position where fear would be instilled in the hearts and minds of people who dare speak truth to power. People must speak out. It's not as if you are being disrespectful, but when something is wrong, when something is inconsistent with the Constitution, with the law, with the ethical standards that we subscribe to, then the public must speak and speak loud.
That brings me to my next question to you then, Chief Justice. As someone who's spoken out the various times that you have, you've spoken on issues around land, you've spoken quite boldly on corruption and ethical leadership. How do you do that without risking the labeling of being a partisan head of the judicial system in this country?
You know, our Constitution is a highly political document. In fact, I can only imagine of very few things that are not covered by the Constitution that are political in character. And two, for that reason, because it's one of my obligations to uphold the Constitution, when anything touches on justice, when anything touches on the possibility of a public office bearer not fulfilling their constitutional obligations, then I am duty-bound to speak out against it. And there is something else. I hear a number of unsolicited lectures about a judge speaking through their judgments. I'm here, and you must have known that I'm not here to deliver any judgment. Judges deliver lectures, judges address a range of meetings, judges get involved in interviews. So the bottom line is, it's proper for a judge to speak about the land issue. My former deputy, the Khamu Seneke, spoke about the land issue, and it's not the only one, and it's proper. We must talk about anything that the preamble to our Constitution says we aspire towards realizing.
So on judgments then, how much consideration is paid to the political ramifications of the cases that come before the Constitutional Court, especially in the last, 4 to 5 years?
Well, I'm not too sure I understand the question.
Do you consider in deciding your judgment how it may shift things as far as the political landscape is concerned?
No, we consider fundamentally where the Constitution points to, where the law and the facts point to, and the implications of the judgment. But whether or not it's going to shift the political landscape in one or the other way in favor of another or to the disadvantage of the other is none of our business.
Speak to me then about the idea of a fully fledged institutional independence for the judiciary, which you say would allow you as judges in this country to do a lot more.
Well, I went to Kenya last year. They are one of the African countries, for instance, that enjoy that. And I know Nigeria also enjoys that, a number of other countries. Botswana is also even better than we are, and Namibia. What that does is, just as is the case with municipalities, which have got their own budgets, they appoint their own staff, they buy whatever needs to be bought, they secure their own security and so on. What we want is not to have only some of the functions that pertain to the operations of the courts assigned to the national department that is known as the Office of the Chief Justice, but an independent establishment that runs the administrative affairs of the judiciary, so that, unlike now, when we need security personnel to be secured, we are the ones who take the decision. I've been giving an example about the poor quality of security, even at the Constitutional Court.
And you had a break-in at your offices as well?
Of course. We have people there with batons, and that is because we were not involved in securing. What can a person with a baton do when armed people come to attack the judges at the institution or the officials at the institution? Two, we've had that security scaled down without even talking to us. Why? We don't have control over it. We want to modernize our court system, move away from this, from paper, hard copies. But we don't have the control of all the budget that could enable us to control our budget. We don't even control the budget for securing our own libraries. And we've had many problems in that regard.
Why do you believe you're not being given that control that is so important to your optimal functioning?
I don't understand it, because what happened was, several years back, my predecessor, Sandy Lengcobo, appointed a committee led by the former Chief Justices Chaskelson and Langa to look into the model that would be ideal for the proper functioning of the judiciary. We passed that on to the executive, and I've got a very distinct sense that they are not comfortable with it, and I wouldn't want to speculate why.
How then do you push them to a point where they have no other choice but to allow you these resources that would allow judges in this country to do what it is that you're meant to do?
The vigilance that I'm appealing from the public extends to this. South Africans must pay interest in every institution that serves them, and whether or not it's healthy. You shouldn't. The problem is we wait until there is virtually irreparable damage to an institution before we step in. We've got to keep a very vigilant, a hawkish eye on the operations of institutions like the judiciary and say, do they have sufficient budget for starters? Do they have what they need to be more effective? Why is it that cases take so long to be finalized? What are some of the challenges? Could they be resource related? And when you do and add to the voice of the judiciary that which is going to serve not me, but serve the South African public better, must be made available to the judiciary, then and only then, I believe, would those resources and those functions be transferred to the judiciary.
I want to rush us along because we are in the dying minutes of our conversation this afternoon and talk about transformation in the judiciary. You've been asked about this a lot. Where are we with that as far as the number of the representation of women and black people?
We're doing very well, considering where we come from. The challenge, though, lies here. We really are doing very well. The challenge lies here. The challenge lies in supporting those who are entering the organized profession. Women and black attorneys, women and black advocates don't receive the kind of work that is necessary to build them up so that when vacancies are available for judges to be appointed, they are at the right level. That is the problem. There is unintended, I want to believe, discrimination at that level. Unfortunately, it affects even the state, it affects even the state-owned enterprises. They are not as supportive of women and black practitioners as they ought to be. The result is some of them drop out.
Am I then to read that sentiment from you as saying that there exists rampant sexism still and perhaps racism in the legal fraternity?
Well, I wouldn't want to go that far. You know, sometimes these things are subconscious. I think there is a need to educate not just the legal fraternity, because the legal fraternity doesn't always give briefs. It is the client. The client comes to you, you are an attorney, says, listen, I want you to go and get advocate so-and-so and advocate so-and-so. I think we need to educate the broader public more and more about the need to contribute towards the realization of our constitutional objectives.
We speak, when we talk about transformation, about the representation of black people, the representation of women, but is the inclusion of LGBTI people factored into the transformation assessments in the judiciary? Is that even a declaration that's made?
Well, nobody is to be excluded. Even the physically challenged people, everybody is to be included. There is no discrimination there.
But
otherwise, you've got to look at the highest court in the land to realize that the LGBTI are well represented.
I was speaking to a young law student earlier this week who was talking about just the challenges as far as getting young black people in particular into the legal fraternity, and she was speaking about pupilage and how from that experience, because it's a workplace experience arrangement, people don't get paid for it. And that surely at its core would disadvantage the many young legal professionals who come from poor backgrounds who may not be able to do work without pay.
That is a serious challenge. You need to, I remember my own example. I was already married, I had a child, I had a bond, and my pension benefits were 8,400. And I had to do pupilage and get an apartment, support my wife who was studying. I was also educating my wife and my younger brother. And the money was finished by the time I completed pupilage. It could have been exhausted even before then. So in the absence of support, it's a serious risk to venture into that direction. That is why everything possible must be done to have a system in place, such as I have had one lawyers association propose, of having a separate fund for those who are from disadvantaged families to tap into for the purpose of funding their educational program at that level. That
brings me then, Chief Justice, to another comment you made this week about just the link between crime and poverty in South Africa. We've just had the latest unemployment stats. 27.6% of South Africans were unemployed in the first quarter of this year. A lot of the people who go through the court system are young. A lot of them are black men. How much consideration does the court pay to that sort of background when deciding what to do with these people who come through the court system? Is the law humane at that level?
Well, the law is humane. We take into account everything, including the damage that you have done to others. What we were battling with not so long ago as a group of all the institutions that have a role to play in the court system was there are far too many people who get imprisoned for stealing bread or a loaf of bread or milk. We are cautioning one another about the system from that. Because why would a person steal a loaf of bread if he or she had an option? And that is where, in relation to the minor people, you have, in fact, in relation to all, you have a diversion program. But we've got to be alive to the challenges that confront people and not be overly theoretical and dogmatic in approaching matters that relate to justice and equity. So we take account of that.
As we conclude then, are you as Chief Justice of South Africa optimistic about the country's future?
I think the best is around the corner. I believe that going forward, every South African will be doing everything possible to make sure that we become that excellent and prosperous country that we have all the possibilities of becoming.
All right, Chief Justice Mogoeng Mogoeng, thank you so much for your time this afternoon.
Thank you.
In a moment, I'll have a full look at the day's top stories. Stay with eNCA now.